Everyone, welcome back to OTD Military History. Very impromptu. This morning, I've been wanting to do with today's guest, Woody. You guys all know who Woody is and the amazing work he does with WW2TV. And if you don't, I don't know how, because I talk about it nonstop. So other than that, we've been wanting to do another, hangout, AMA, whatever. So if you guys have questions, fire away all time. We'll get to what we can, and if not, I've got stuff for Woody because I always have questions for Woody. But other than that, sorry, there's something else I was going to say. Now I forget. Doesn't matter. We'll get to it later, probably. All right. Thanks for jumping on, Woody. Oh yeah, it was this morning. You reached out this morning to do this. That's why it's so impressive.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because Douglas Nash, my guest, is right. Lost his voice, which is never good for a guest. So we're rescheduling. So I had a window.
There we go. So works out well. Third day of the year. So why not start off real strong? Yeah. So AMA, I don't think there's been questions really on the sidebar yet. If I miss them, please fire away again. One that I know, I probably already know the answer, but I'll just start it because I wrote it down. Because I was watching your chat with JD from, I think, before Christmas. And we've talked about this before, but the Falaise Gap book. I mean, we've talked about, Falaise Gap in depth and, why it's important and all of that. And again, it's not to ask you, like, how's it going, but I kind of am asking how it's going just because I want to, ask the kind of, if you're still on the same direction you were thinking previously about, doing an in-depth look, or were you going a different direction from the, the personal narrative kind of way?
Well, I'm still definitely working on it. I'm working on the plan of knowing what I'm going to work on before I work on it. Right. In that I don't want to start work on something that ends up changing direction halfway through. I pretty much know what I want to do and what I don't want it to be. So at the moment, I'm just kind of running through a few ideas. I've got to have a couple of discussions with a couple of publishers. I'm still gathering sources, gathering research information, and kind of having a look at it. And I've been down there, had a quick look round, and sort of trying to just make sense of it in my own head first, because as you know, when you're studying anything, is that for the Falaise Gap, for example, is what are my boundaries going to be, date wise, location wise, geography wise, that because it's not, Juno Beach is a pretty precise area. So if you're talking about everything that's happening on Juno Beach, you can say, well, okay, left of that, it's no longer Juno Beach, but the Falaise Gap and the Falaise Pocket gets a little bit complicated. And so I'm kind of just formulating some ideas, and then I'm going to go and speak to a publisher or two and suggest what I think it should be, and then they'll probably come back and say, well, that's quite good, but we also think that this would be a good direction. Then I can rejig it, and then at some point there I will kind of start on working, because I don't feel I don't want to start doing something and waste time. I want to make sure it's something that's going to be something I enjoy doing, and also something that, frankly, people are going to read and buy. There's no point me at my time of life spending 2 years working on something that's like a vanity project that just becomes a thing I self-publish and no one buys. I mean, I want it to be out there. So that's where I kind of am. If that's a bit of a vague answer. But.
No, of course. Well, I was expecting it, but but I get completely what you're saying, because it's the same for me, right? You don't want to do all this work and then change, do a 180 on you, because that's happened to me in the past, and it's a bit of jarring, and you feel like you've wasted a ton of time and efforts, and it's not the best. So, question from Andreas, and thanks for hanging out with us, is, I know we've discussed this in the past, but I think it's always a good topic to revisit, is any good books, or what you maybe recommend now as opposed to previously.
Well, I mean, we're lacking. I mean, we're lacking decent books. I mean, that's kind of why I'm doing it. I mean, there's obviously some good stuff from the Canadian point of view that doesn't cover other aspects. So our mutual guest Mark Zelke has done stuff on it. There's some decent French and Polish language studies of the first Polish Armored Division, a little bit in English, but not so much. I find one of the best books is the Battle Zone book that were edited by Simon True from Sandhurst, by Paul Latowski, who was a Pole who I think still works at Sandhurst. But it's a 120-page battlefield guide, but I think it actually holds up pretty well. There's Eddie Florentin, a French author. He wrote Stalingrad in Normandy, was the British or the English translation. That's got to be at least 50 years old. It's good, but it's it's pre Ultra, I think, was written. It's pre when people spent boots on the ground studying it. So that's there. But yeah, no, there isn't much. Hence quite really why I'm thinking of doing it. It seems that there should be a better book on the subject, and there isn't.
Right. I mean, that's the thing, because I've been asked that too, right, multiple times, and it's not necessarily an issue of giving recommendations, but it's like you're gonna have to read this whole part of the other part of the book to get the fillets to make sense. Like I have, well, all the Normandy books have been on my desk permanently for the last couple of months, but like Fields of Fire by Terry Kopp, you have to get into it to make it make sense. So it's just it's really hard for me to recommend, and I haven't got to it, but there's the book on the 4th Armored Division,
right?
On that, I haven't literally got it for Christmas, but it hasn't come yet. So that's what I'm going to dig into. But I don't like recommending things I don't know, right? So it's and people are asking about the U.S. side. I don't really know much.
John McManus, I think, covered it in his second book, Americans in Normandy, a little bit. James Holland covers it kind of in passing in his Normandy 44, but he was kind of running out of word count, and it got a bit of a short shrift, really. I mean, the other thing is you get books on the Falaise Gap that aren't really on the Falaise Gap. The first half of the book is explaining what's happening before the Falaise Gap, and then you get to Falaise Gap. And, I can see in the sidebar there various people talking. I mean, one of the things I definitely don't want to do in a Falaise Gap book is waste half of it saying what's happened before. I mean, I'm going to, if I can't get the summary of what's happened between the beaches and the Falaise Gap done in about 3 or 4 pages, I will have considered that I failed. I mean, and it's not that all that pre-stuff isn't interesting. It's just that it's going to just take away valuable word count from what it is I want to write about. So I'm going to kind of say, can't go into Totalized, Tractable, and Cobra and all how it pins together. It's just assume this is the situation. The situation, and I'm probably going to start something like August the 15th. This is where we are. If you want to find out how we got there, kind of, there'll be a bibliography. Go and read that stuff. And again, I know that it'll have a kind of a hard cutoff at the end, and it won't go as far as Paris. And some books that talk about the Falaise Gap talk about Paris, and they talk about Le Havre. And I know neither of those will be in it because, again, I don't want to do that. So it's it's definitely an area that's been lacking.
I mean, I completely agree. Like, where do you cut off? What is Normandy? Also, people like DF is Normandy, so that doesn't go until September. Like, from obviously that's the Canadian perspective. So a question about the long left flank, we'll get there in a second. But it's just what I'm thinking, right? Is where the cutoff. I'm doing that big project, right? I'm just because I'm driving through it, I'm going to go to Rouen. So because I have to cross the Seine. So why not?
Here's an area that I'm debating about. Is there were some Belgian SAS operations near Rouen,
right?
That were happening from about August 11th, 12th, that are sort of part of the Falaise Gap, because certainly the Belgian SAS were briefed that we think there's going to be a German movement escaping from Normandy. Can you go and do something about it? And I feel these accounts haven't been seen by many people, but whether or not they're actually strictly part of the battle, I will have to kind of at some point make that editorial decision. I think it's not a big enough, so I think I can probably just do 2 or 3 pages about it and include it in there because it's interesting, but maybe it'll have to not be part of it. These are decisions I think it's important to make early. I mean, any advice I have, and I've done 2 books. I'm not like I'm not Peter Gaddick Adams or James Holland. is that if you're thinking of doing a book, talk to people who you're thinking of publishing it with before you start writing it, or at the very earliest stages, because you may end up finding you've written something that no one wants to publish because it's too narrow. I mean, people will always publish something. You can self-publish, but it's whether or not you want to spend time working on a project that only your mum, your best friend, and the 5 people you give it to read.
Come from academics, I know exactly what you're talking about. Which I haven't done it myself because I learned that lesson a long time ago. But it's a tough one, and this is connected, but it's also a good question. Is why so little, and good way of putting it, actually, a little bit, is the Allied Blitzkrieg. I can't talk. Blitzkrieg, and that's what's called the long left flank and the Great Swan, moving up through the Channel ports. I think I know the answer. I mean, I know my opinion.
It's not sexy, is it? That's the problem. It's not. It's. from my point of view, it's one of those campaigns that falls in between stuff that draws people's attention. It's like the Peter Caddick games when he was worried about filling in between the end of the Battle of the Bulge and V-Day. Are people interested in that? And they should be, because lots of really pivotal things happen. But is it the sports match that the main channel are televising live, or is it the one they're putting in the highlights show afterwards? That's to use a crass sporting analogy there. And I think the Great Swan, is it the essential campaign of that part? I would say probably it's not the top one. Well, I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe
Well, I'm going to get called biased no matter what I say, right?
Yeah,
so
I mean,
I'll be told you're Canadian, of course, or you're not a good enough Canadian. How dare you say that?
We've talked about it before. I think you and I have talked about it. Is that I think all of us can only really easily comprehend one timeline at a time. So we have World War II running along a single line. So it's like, invasion of Poland, blah, 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 Battle of Britain. And when there are 2 or 3 or 4 things happening on the same date, we just have to kind of ignore 2 of them because our brains simply can't compute it all. I mean, we can, look at how the liberation of Rome is just almost completely forgotten because it's happening the same time as D-Day. We talk about Anzio, we talk about Monte Cassino because they didn't fall quite when there was something as pivotal happening. But, that's, I mean, it's the Allied Blitzkrieg is a really good one to talk about. I mean, there's lots of stuff there, but
I mean, you're right. It's not, again, but this is just my bias, but to me, there are tons of stories there. I mean, that I think people would be interested in if they could get the attention. I mean, the use of just the weapons alone, if you want to go that hardcore way of doing that old school military history of, threatening to burn the German defenders out, literally, I think would get people's attention. Right. And that happens more than once. So it's these fights for these channel ports to me I think has to do with what's coming next, and that's where I'm going to lead into this a little bit. But also that those ports don't get used for what they thought they were going to get used for, and then that leads to questions about Antwerp, and then it just becomes about Monty and Market Garden. And I see it all the time. So
you could also make the point that the Americans taking the Brittany ports is not given enough attention, and the fact that whichever one it was down there that was still, in German hands till VE Day, that got cut off. I mean, the very fact that Brittany, was almost self-liberated by the resistance in certain areas, and you have proper stand-up battles between 2 or 3 French resistance and German SS units and Heer units that no one talks about because it's peripheral to the central push. So, and this is where you could do a book where you do both things. You could do the Brits and Canadians pushing up the channel ports, and you could do the Americans pushing down the Brittany ports and kind of tie them all together. It's not quite, there's an overlap of the dates there, but there's also some bits that don't tie up there. But it's who's going to do it, who's going to spend that time working on something like that probably isn't going to get you in that kind of eye line in bookstores, because we know, I can't speak for Canada, but I can speak for the UK. What gets you in the eye line is Arnhem. Dam Busters, 617 Squadron, Tobruk, possibly, D-Day, definitely, Spitfires, definitely, and you could kind of jazz it up with a title, but people will still look at the second title and go, if it's not got Arnhem in the title, will they be interested in it? We're being grumpy already, Brad, but
well, we knew that was going to happen. I think everybody knew that was coming. I mean, it's not to focus on the negative, but that's just to me, it's a fact in the sense of this is what happens, right? Of course, if it was up to me and you, there'd be 1,000 books on everything and every little detail would be covered, but that's just not the reality. And that it's motivated by interest and funds and all kinds of stuff.
The funding is important, I think. I mean, I'm in a position where I'm able to make a living out of what I enjoy, but there are many people in history who it is secondary to their main job. It is a hobby job, or if it is their real job, they're struggling to make ends meet because people watching this are thinking that these military authors that they buy their books of are rolling around in their chateaus and mansions. There aren't many who are doing that. Writing military history, even prolific authors, you have to kind of supplement it with things as well. So if you're going to devote 2 or 3 years into a book, you've got to know it's going to sell at the end of it. So why that's why people are sticking to the Battle of the Britain and Midway and things like that. I mean, John Parshall, 12 years he's been working on his 1942 book. But that commitment is rare.
Yep. I mean, it's like a dissertation, but bigger in a way. And it's a big one. Anyway, let's not focus too much on the negative. This is a good question, actually, and I don't really have an answer, so hopefully you do. Is there a small story of a civilian/soldier that you love and never hear about?
Well, I'm sure there are, but I can't think of one off the top of my head now. I mean, when I go and look at my bookshelves, there'll be those books I get that, you know, someone in a family gave me the self-published book about a particular veteran. I mean, I did it the book on my Canadian book reviews about Lloyd Chadbourne. There's a Canadian hero whose story is, you know, reasonably well known within Canada in a certain quarters, but not known globally.
Right.
So I mean, I'm sure there are. I mean, definitely there's a lack of civilian accounts from Europe generally. There's a lack of people writing in English about Danish resistance, Norwegian resistance, British, French resistance, that kind of thing. That isn't really happening. And I don't necessarily mean, you know, the active resistance, but kind of the defiant spirit, the kind of occupation, and you know. So we're back to the thing about the people saying there's nothing left to write about with World War II. Absolutely, there's thousands of things still to write about and still to talk about.
That drives me bonkers when I hear that. It's just about even anything, and I'm like, it's just not true. It's just you're not looking or you don't care. But yeah, I mean, like, well, for mine, real quick, I don't know. I think we were just asking you, but to me, it depends on. And I've said this before, you know, what you're working on currently or what you've just done, because that always changes for historians. You've said the same, right? Your favorite will change or your recommendeds will change. It's to me, I found stories of soldiers by accident. Like I put a video on this one soldier. I found it in Curry's files related to the First World War. He was in service for 3 days, ends up dead. Like, what happened there? You know what I mean? Like, stories like that to me are fascinating because they're small but they're not talked about, and they have big things to say and little things to say. So, but it just doesn't interest a lot of people. So it's hard to dig and get all that stuff. So again, back to the negative, but I think the thing is that there's tons, and we should be supporting people who want to do that. So,
well, I mean, we were talking about on the World War II TV Zoom that a few people did the family histories. We're at the era where the veterans who have served are about to die off completely. And there's going to be a proliferation of families telling what their dad said to them and their grandmother said to them. And that's going to be fantastic, but it needs to be correlated and checked out and verified and worked alongside the archives and all that process. And I'm worried that that's not going to be. So, yeah, the thing about those accounts, those self-published accounts by people from their family or their next door neighbor, in order for a historian to use that, that account has to fit into some kind of greater story they're trying to say. So is that a story that's telling about how PTSD brings people? Is it explaining the process of being a POW and what happens to people in that? You know, is it teaching us about how a pilot is adapting to a new type of aircraft? Because that's where the information will become as relevant to a wider audience. I mean, that doesn't mean that I don't like family histories, as you say there, for their own interest and for a little slice of the war. But if it's going to reach a wider circulation, it has to be part of a wider story. You know, my granddad, who did 6 years in the Royal Artillery in England in coastal defence, I can't think of any part of his 6 years that deserves a place in any real study of World War II. And I see that's really harsh on my granddad. Sorry, Granddad. But, you know, it was parading up and down and, you know, he learned how to polish his boots, etc. I don't think there's anything he ever told me that is significant in terms of, well, there's something that explains how the British Army won World War II. It's important for my family, but you know, maybe I just didn't ask him the right question. Maybe he was working on some secret bit of radar technology that he never told to her. I don't know, but
yeah, the British version of the Scarecrow now. The British version of the Scarecrow or something. So that's good. Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's lots of factors, but I just like doing it sometimes because I just like doing it. I guess it's my answer. this is a good question because I've thought about this myself. Is the the destroyers for bases deal, and kind of the I guess the valuable element that those destroyers brought. I mean, there is a lot of criticism for them. I think a lot of it is justified in some sense, but that's me. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
It's not an area I'm particularly knowledgeable about, although I would say that the contribution is one of those things that helps tide us over until something better comes along. I think that lots of those things that are being implemented in kind of 40, 41, even 42, they're clearly not, they're stopgap. They're placeholders. But I think, I wouldn't say that they changed the course of World War II and they are a massive, great unsung part of it. And it's the one thing that we don't, we're into that hyperbole where a new thing has to be secret, uncovered thing that turned the war. And
the deal that won the war, or
I'm not going to say that about it, but I'm going to say that those World War I ships that come out, others that come out of mothballs and things like that. I mean, you could widen that out generally to the kind of weaponry the British take out of mothballs for home defense. That they were tiding us over. The P14 rifles that the Home Guard used, that kind of stuff. Yeah, they're not going to win any best rifle of World War II contests.
No,
but did they do a job until something better came along? That's that. So yeah.
I mean, to me, because I did a video kind of connected with this and kind of how Canada and the US helped fund Britain through those difficult years before Pearl Harbor. And to me, I also see it from the Americans' perspective, particularly from FDR, is this is a way to make the war more palatable at home.
Yeah.
I think that doesn't get forgotten, obviously. We always have to preface these things. People know that. But to me, it's one of those progressions, right? As FDR is trying, and there's the whole talk of isolationism and blah, 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 whatever. But you still had to do something because he wanted to do something. So this was a way to do something, but also get something to help placate all the opposition at home, but also within the military itself. And I think that also gets forgotten.
And also, on a human level, all of these bits of equipment that weren't ideal, and I'll get criticism for saying the Bolton Pool Defiant or the Brewster Buffalo or the World War I destroyers. People were on those things. People were flying those things. People were taking those things up and trying to defeat enemy forces. And, whether or not they were the greatest thing ever, they were what we had right now. And it's like, if you're starving, you don't turn down the food you don't like, do you? You eat it anyway. And I think that era, I think, is under discussed. I think the 41, 42, because everybody who likes aircraft likes the latest stuff because everything got better. No one's going to choose a 1939 aircraft or because everything gets better as the war goes on. Of course, you're always wanting to improve. So people's favorite armored vehicles are the better ones, and the ones at the beginning weren't the better ones. But are they part of the process? I think we don't often think enough about it's like evolution, isn't it? Everything is on a family tree somewhere, and the Americans are taking up crappy aircraft in 1940 are part of the evolution that is bringing in the P-51 later. It's lessons are being learned. Like, don't go up in that thing. It's a bloody death bullet magnet. But you're learning. That's the process. Sometimes you have to find out how not to do something before you know how well to do something. And
that's a good point. And I think that gets forgotten is the lessons learned. And it's just in war, it costs lives. So it's obviously going to have that element to it and can't be forgotten. But I can't agree more. I mean, it's hard not to, right? It's everybody loves the Spitfire at the end, but it didn't start there. So, and it doesn't work that way.
Exactly.
This is a good question. I guess we can just focus on the World War II part because I know a little bit about this just from visiting and what I do, but the coverage in French or French language, I guess. Always got to shout out my Quebec ancestors about how, is it well covered? Is the Second World War well covered? Is there topics that are lacking? Is there primary focus? And I just want to jump in real quick because I've been to the Army Museum in Paris, and to me, the World War II section was a little lacking. about other parts. So is that an overall trend of the French historiography, or is it well balanced, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think France has that same kind of middle-aged man obsessed by World War II demographic that Britain has, and America probably has, and Canada has, and France has other things. So I don't think, history festivals here, we have ways I don't think would kick off in France in that same way. But there are some very good books in French about World War II, and the sad thing is, I've talked about it on World War II TV, is due to the way the French translation world the laws work. They don't get translated into English, and not enough English books get translated into French. So you go into a museum in Normandy, there are the French books about World War II and Normandy written by French authors, and there are the English, American, Canadian books written by British, American, that don't get translated into French. You get a few books translated. Giles Milton's book on D-Day, A Soldier's Story, is in French, for example, because he spent 6 months of his life in France. His wife is French, and he was able to bring a French version out. But if James Holland wants to have a book translated into French, and he goes to a French translator, because you can't, I'm probably going to, I don't want to, say anything, I'm libelous here, but under French law, the translator, even though you pay them a flat rate for the translator, they become a co-author of the French English edition.
Okay.
So automatically, if you write a book, Brad, about the Canadians in Normandy, and you get someone in France translated to French, the French edition, you split the proceeds with that French translator. That's kind of how it works. So it's very off-putting, because you don't make much money as an author on books anyway. Then you've got to split it with someone who's already been paid to do the translation. So it's very complicated. Yeah. Niels is saying it's a third co-author. So, either way, it's off-putting, and there just isn't enough collaboration between publishing houses in France and publishing houses in Britain, and it seems that Jean Kellyanne is the French author. So he's older than Peter Caddick Adams. He's in his 70s, and he was teaching history at the Memorial of University in Caen. His last couple of books on the occupation, in my slow reading of French and the bits I've looked at, appear to be fantastic. But they just won't be available in English. It won't happen. So I've only had 3 or 4 different French guests on my channel, and given I live in France, that's ridiculous. But they're kind of plowing a separate furrow, which is a shame.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, we have a small version of that here. I mean, obviously, with being the English and French being the predominant languages, and there is some cross-pollination, but less than you'd think and less than it should be. So I can only imagine what it's like on a bigger scale. Sorry, I'm trying not to. I can't really keep up with the comments down below because I'm trying to keep the questions. But I saw Neil's comment about having done this himself, so that must have been very frustrating to have to work with.
It annoys me that there's not enough exchange between the international communities that study World War II. I mean, it's back to the same old thing that I think Americans tend to write for an American audience, Brits sort of largely write for British audience, Canadians write for Canadian audience. And you see where I'm going with this, and people aren't considering the international audience, and it means we're kind of in some ways learning our history in kind of echo chambers. But
yeah. I mean, we talk about this all the time, but we work online, so it's a bit of a different ballgame for us. This is an interesting question. I don't think I know your answer. So who was the author who influenced you to study/continue to study World War II?
I think Ian Dalglish, who wrote the books Operation Blue Coat, Over the Battlefield, Operation Goodwood. When I came to Normandy and was starting to guide, I had a nice collection of books, and I kind of knew what I needed to know. I think he was the first person to really make me realize that the Normandy campaign, and by extension World War II, is still ripe for, as we were saying earlier, discussion, study, and he ignited a passion. I think it was a tragedy. We lost him in an air crash about 15 years ago. And his work he was doing, which he would be so impressed with what people have done since his passing with, Google Earth and digital imaging and things like that to to add to what he did. He was bringing us battlefields in a kind of 3-dimensional way by using aerial photos.
Yeah.
And he is one I can really think of. Going back to my youth, and a name that no one will get is Brian L. Davis. So Brian Davis was a former British Army. I'm going to say he was a quartermaster sergeant or quartermaster officer, and he wrote a book in the 70s maybe called The British Army Uniforms and Insignia of World War II or something like that, which I have a copy of. And that just was a book that I had alongside my comics as a sort of 10, 11, 12-year-old to kind of look up slouch hats and webbing and what's that jacket that guy there is wearing.
Right.
And I that's a book, an author that he would sell. He was a military dealer as well, so I'd go to events. He was selling military, and he would always stop and answer questions. So he started me on the route to collecting military, which I did back then. And again, this how to use World War II as a learning tool and how to find stuff out, and that there's an angle for everybody. Because I started via uniforms and equipment. That was the angle that got me in as a teenager, and then moved to operational studies as I got into my early middle age, I guess. So that's two that I think of. And you, Brad?
Yeah, that's a good one. So for me, I hate saying this out loud, but it's accurate. When I was younger, I had a general interest in World War II, but I came of age or started to really get the interest around the, I hate saying it out loud, but because of Stephen Ambrose, because of Band of Brothers.
Oh dear, yeah.
I know, young Brad was dumb, but so that got the interest going. So that's why I went to school, and then I took a bit of a break, and I thought I was going to do something else with my life, and the passion never left. But what got me back to come do all of this and come back to school and all that was Tim Cook. And I know a lot of people already know this about. I talk about his books all the time. They're fantastic. They're academically sound but engaging, and that's what it was, right? It was, and you've had him on the channel. And he's such a busy guy. He's coming out with another book on the war, so that'll be interesting from what he told me. I can't say yet because it's not done, but he'll be good to have on for that one, for you especially. But that, like, I didn't know that was possible, if that makes sense. Coming from having done a master's in the dry academics and people not thinking any of that stuff is interesting. So him reading reading his, it was actually the First World War ones with shock troops and at the sharp end, and him reading how he wrote about it and then seeing the reactions that people had to it is what did it for me. And then that's when I just went down, as we say, the rabbit hole of his works. And that's really kind of what lighted the fire back in me to get into this again and know that this stuff was possible. So I guess that's one way to put it is Tim Cook. And I've got to work for him and know him. So it's
nice.
I think a great thing to have.
It was brave of you to say Stephen Ambrose, and I think we all have to collectively doff our hats to the fact that he was an incredibly importantly influential figure in getting people reading about history who didn't previously read about history. And sure, he got into some issues of plagiarism of himself, and the standard went down a bit, and he made some claims and couldn't back them up. But I wouldn't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater and say that we can just dismiss him completely. He didn't murder anybody. He wasn't. He progressed the world of history forwards, and people have taken that ball on beyond him. So yes, he's not taught in the same way at universities anymore, and I think people realize that his work is problematic. But I think, without him, we probably wouldn't be doing what we're doing. Us tour guides in Norman, because Stephen Ambrose is part of the process, the evolution that eventually brings us Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers and video games. So you take him out of that, I don't know if that route would have carried on in the same way. So
yeah, I mean, you probably don't have, as it's been termed, as the World War II Renaissance in that way. I mean, would it have come anyway? We can't say, but
James Murphy just said Richard Holmes. I should mention Richard Holmes as well there. So Richard Holmes, who again died about 10 years ago. So when I was first in Normandy, so I was in my 30s then, and I met him out somewhere like Sword Beach. And I'd seen him on TV doing his Dunkirk shows and World War One walkabouts and what have you. And I said hello, and he said hello. Then later that day, I was walking down the high street in Bayeux, near where I live now, and he saw me and said, "Oh, you're finished now." I said, "Yes, I'm going home. Do you want to join us for a drink?" And Peter Caddick Adams was there. It was the first time I met Peter Caddick Adams, and he I probably told this story before on my channel. You know, he invited me to join him at his table, and he let me listen to his war stories along with PCA, and also he asked me who I was and what I was doing here, and listen to what I knew. And I'm thinking, I know nothing compared to you guys. And then the next day,
yeah,
you know, I stayed as long as I could, and next day I bumped into Matt Hillman, so just inland from Salt.
Yeah.
And I was there with my group, and he was there with his. Actually, he wasn't there. He was there overseeing. I think Peter Adams was guiding the group, and Richard was there, I think, as some supervisory figure. So he wasn't actually doing the presentation. And I noticed him edging over towards me to listen to what I was saying about Hillman. So I'm thinking, oh, good grief, you know, there's the pressure on now.
Yeah, panic.
And he came over afterwards and said, there's a couple of things there I would have improved on and things like that. But I didn't know that story then. There's one particular bit he didn't know about the German colonel who was there that I picked up from the French volunteers there. And so he made, you know, he did the compliment. You know, he said, you were good on this, but you were a bit weak on that. I would brush up on this. I think he told me to read more about the artillery barrage or something like that. But he said thank you for the story that I'd shared. He said he was going to add that to his arsenal. I don't know if he ever did, but the point is he knew how to make me feel on a level with him. And then I saw him again a few years later at the launch of the Gilder Battlefield Guides, which I joined but then didn't proceed with, and then he passed away very shortly after. So one of those very important guys. I know Philip Blood knew him quite very well back then. Very, very supportive of people coming up around him, very helpful of the people coming up on the ladder. And, you know, I don't want to sound all kind of preachy, but I would like to think, although I'm not anywhere way comparing myself to Sir Richard Holmes, but I would like to think I would help people behind me now to kind of pull themselves up. And that was something that Richard showed, because not all historians are like that. Some of them are very protective and not very helpful, and, you know, gatekeepers, and, you know, they don't want to let people into their castles. Not many, but there are some.
There's some, and they're rather, anyway. I've run into a few. Anyway, so that's a good one. I obviously never met him, but I've never heard anything bad. So that's
wonderful guy.
That's rare. So that's good. That's always great to hear. Yeah, I've heard many stories about him, so it's always great to hear about him, and obviously his impact is massive. This is an interesting one. We'll do a what if, because why not? Dutch East Indies. If the U.S., British, whatever, are untouched in East Asia, do they still protect the Dutch East Indies? Or join the war that takes place there? I know my answer.
We'll give you your answer, then I'll build on yours.
Well, because I had to do stuff on the intel, right, leading up to Hong Kong. And from my perspective, again, this is a what if, and we can't prove any of this, is yes, because, and I learned this during the process and from some great historians working on intel and all that stuff. The thought was that there wasn't even going to be an attack on what I call like the Western powers, right? Britain and US and all that. They were going to hit Thailand. And there was talk among some British circles that they were going to help the Thais fight the Japanese. So something as important as the Dutch East Indies, to me, again, this is all a what if, I would say yes, because that was just part of the overall plan to begin with, is to stop the expansion anyway, in any way, shape, or form. So if Japanese come to blows, they're going to do what they can. Probably would have had another repulse in Prince of Wales anyway, but at least I think they might have been. But I don't know. That's a big what if.
I mean, I think there's going to be conflict in that part of the world that is going to draw everybody in somehow. It's like Michael Nyberg's writing about the fall of France, you know, how much that affected American policy, but not just because of France, but because of European interests in South America, European interests in Central America. You know, we tend to, all of us, not think about how global that everything was back then and how connected it all was. And we think about this, you know, well, America wouldn't have been affected by things. Well, of course it would. And Britain had its empire and its sinews and its logistics. So the end result, I think, would have been the world fighting each other, but the exact route to the global conflict would have been different. But and you can't. Ultimately, there's resources everywhere in that part of the world, aren't there? So people's people's needs to have rubber and oil and zinc and copper and all that would eventually. But the counterfactuals are interesting though.
That's an interesting one, I think, because I mean it's discussed because from the Pearl Harbor show, which was it shouldn't be eye-opening to me, but it still I mean, I've seen it all before. I literally have written on this in grad school and stuff. So it's just some of the things you hear, but it is absolutely wild. I think Andrea said all of us here will buy your Flay's Gap book, so that's just accurate.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's the kind of that's the sell I have to a publisher, is that I have got a channel with 65,000 subscribers, a percentage of whom will presumably buy the book just anyway, even if it turns out to be shit, they'll buy it anyway. So that's quite a good selling point. Yeah. So
this is an interesting one from Rob, and just watching his live stream for jumping on here is. Too prolific. I wouldn't call myself prolific, but sure. You are, not me. The restriction of military historical content, and what does that mean going forward? If you don't want to talk about that, because I know you had your week-long exile there for what happened before the Christmas break there. I think about this a lot, but I'd be interested to hear anything you're willing to share on this.
I think we'll all have to learn that there are rules of engagement with how media is shared on YouTube. And as I said on my channel, it regardless of whether we approve the way YouTube works, it's their playground, it's their ball, it's their game that they're allowing us to work. And sure, they make money from us, but I without going into details, there'll be subjects I will be avoiding a little bit or treating with more care as I move forwards. I mean, I definitely try to avoid making parallels with modern wars and things like that, because that becomes problematic in certain ways. I can't think military history content's going to go away, because it's too many people interested in it. Too many people are there. They'll just, the creators and the viewers will just have to learn to play by the rules of the providers, the channels, the YouTubers and what have you. So yeah, I mean, I do feel that there's going to be more and more YouTubers and podcasters going for the greatest hits, going for the popular stuff, going for the Easy Company, going for Commandos, going for fighter pilots, Spitfires, all that kind of stuff, because it brings you immediate recognition and views and followings. And I think it's easy to slip into a thing where you just keep on giving people the easy stuff. So I do worry that some YouTube creators are going for the easy hits, but I understand, because I'm also trying to move forward to take advantage of the system, because there's no point creating content if no one's seeing it. So you kind of it's complicated. It's a very good, but I think military history is here to stay online. What do you think, Brad?
I mean, I agree. It's not going anywhere. I think how it's going to be done is going to, like you said, is going to have to change. The thing that just, again, and I completely agree with you. And also, of course, it's Google, and there's nothing we can do, but it's their playground. To me, the rules are not clear, and they change. And situations, one time it's fine, another time it's not. Like I've had this run in. I still have that stupid warning on my channel that should be going away shortly. Just the rules don't seem to be consistent. That's what bugs me. If we had a rule book, I would be much happier, because then I could be like, I just won't do that. But other people do it, they're fine. I do it and I get a strike, or they do it and get a strike. I do it and it's fine. You know what I mean? So it's frustrating to me to know where the line is, because the only way to find out is to cross it, and then it can have an impact on the channel, right? You can get banned for a week, or they can shut the whole thing down, depending on what it is.
And clearly there's not enough coming together of YouTube creators to try and not unionize the situation, but speak with one voice. And again, the reason is that we all don't want to be tarred by the same brush. We don't want to bring our own channels down by getting involved and standing up defending other channels, and it is very complicated. And the fact is, we're not even necessarily dealing with human beings half the time. That's the thing. It's a system that doesn't have the flexibility to understand nuance.
And that was one of the things why I did that AI stuff, is because I wanted to talk about it previously because people had asked, but your situation really put it to the front of my mind, and some of the things I'd said were just it's not going to work. And that is one thing I do, and I'm going to have a whole show on that about but that's my big concern moving forward is AI and control and content. But yeah, and I mean shorter form, which you've started to do, even though I told you to start doing that.
You did.
You listen.
Yeah, no, it's
it's. I think that's the way it's going to be. That's going to have to be part of everyone's arsenal now. We don't really have a choice because you'll get left behind. But that's my thing is the shorter stuff. I mean, it's not, I love your stuff. Obviously I watch as much as I can, but I mean, for anybody else who might want to be doing this, I mean, Rob perfectly has done a great job with it, obviously, with his shorts and the amount of people he's got on board already from doing that. Is
insane. There's someone who Rob has clearly looked at what the system requires, looked at what it needs, looked at how it works, and has capitalized on that to incredible success. And the fact that he's donating profits to charity is to his credit. And yeah, so well done. The people who are able to use their intelligence to not beat the system, but to comply with the system and use it properly, great. But we're back to the subject of why we even do it at all. Why we even put our hours in? You've got to enjoy it. For me, you've got to enjoy it. You've got to.
Yep.
And I love what I do, and if other people like it, great. And more people are starting to like it, which is great. But if I'm not interested in it myself, then I haven't got longevity. I won't. It'll become a job again.
Yeah, you'll hate it and move on. So this is well, you get into that, and I have some people, believe it or not, who didn't come through you to the channel. Like Alex, this is Alex Bowers with his new channel, and stuff he's doing here is a Brit in Canada. Just a real brief explanation of how you got this going, because I know you've talked about this multiple times, but it would be good just to hear for the people who don't necessarily know all your background of how this went about.
Sure. So I was a battlefield guide for years. And the long story short is after 16, 17 years of guiding, I was finding I wasn't enjoying it as much as I used to be. Lots of repetition, lots of being in the same place, the same thing, telling the same stories to almost interchangeable people. So I had this idea back in 2018 of kind of doing some homemade kind of documentary making stuff. I knew you could buy decent quality cameras and microphones and stuff. So I kind of had a go at doing some. And that's why I started my channel, my YouTube channel, these kind of woody made documentaries. And then I found out I didn't really like that either, because I found the editing process absolutely soul destroying. I wasn't very good at it. And all the enjoyment I had of standing out of the place and filming something was then being lost when I got back to editing and putting it together and realizing the sound wasn't as good as I wanted to do. I didn't quite have the shot I needed and B-roll and stuff like that. So that I'd stopped doing as much guiding as I had been doing to do this documentary making thing, and then I wasn't liking that as much either. As a real crossroads. And then COVID hit, and when COVID hit, I can't do guiding all the documentary making and such because of restrictions and stuff like that. So I hit upon this idea of people joining me via Zoom and chatting about war stuff. So it completely started accidentally. And ended up being it ended up being exactly what I wanted it to be, which is the combination of the live presentation to people on a battlefield, which is me sitting here talking to you as if you are a tour group, combined with the sharing of new subjects each day and each week and moving on. So it's ended up being exactly the right solution to the problem I had, but it came about accidentally. So anyone who thinks it was some planned business strategy, it wasn't. It was a problem. It was something I tried to do that wasn't working in the right way, and then accidentally, thanks to COVID, became the thing I wanted to be. So that's it. That's how I came to do it. Yeah.
So I'll just have not a confession, but because we met through Twitter before it went to real bad. And you were doing something, I can't remember. You were still looking for people to come on or whatever, and talked about Hong Kong, and you said come on board. And I said awesome, of course not. Why wouldn't I? Especially with live shots from the place. I mean, it turns out technology wasn't as great as it is now, even that short time ago. However, the first time I went on your channel, I did not watch any of the live streams. I went to the video you did on the bocage.
Right, yeah.
Which was fantastic. If you haven't seen that, guys, you should watch it. Because I think that's kind of what you're talking about, that earlier stuff. You tried some different stuff, and it's kind of, you've taken that as the walkabouts now, like what you did.
Yeah, I still do it live. Yeah.
Stuff. Anyway, yeah, so I was like, I honestly don't know what I'm getting myself into. I was a little confused. I'm like, wait a second, is he going to be the one doing that, or how's this going to work? But obviously, it wasn't the case, and your format I think is fantastic, and the way the amount you do is just wild. I've said this before. I don't know how you do it, but.
Well, I don't do it. I mean, I host and the guest comes on with the history. So you do a lot more of the history yourself. So that's where you've got to write it and script it and research it. I have someone else come on and do the tough bit. I just do the management in a sense. So that's how I can do more stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's. Oh, I know how, because I try to do it, and I know it's not easy. So I think you're selling yourself a bit short, but I know you do that. So I'm going to say it anyway. You do a great job with it. So
thank you.
So this is a good one, because I'm starting to work my way to the bottom here, because I like the way it's worded. Was Churchill a military idiot or simply a fossil too committed to preserving the British Empire?
Yes, and yes, but lots of many other things as well. I mean, he's a million things, Churchill, that are all true and all false at the same time. I mean, why have there been over 1,000 biographies of Sir Winston Churchill since he passed? Because people are still trying to really nail down who he was, what he was good at, and I think if we could bring him back right now, he would be still as confused, dealing as he was with depression, mental health, and things. Exactly. He's very complicated. He is arguably one of the most complicated individuals of the 20th century, and indeed the previous century, because he was born. So, he every time there's something you go, well, but that's genius. There's something pretty much in the same day that you go, well, that's idiotic. Yeah, that's genius. Getting the commando concept going. Mulberry Harbors, things like that, the things that he persevered with that became war winners, fantastic. The meddling, the mistakes, he's all of the above. Whatever you think about him, every adjective to describe a human being, I think, could pretty much be put to Churchill, and there'd be some validity to it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. To me, just as a quick one, is looking at Alan Brooks' diaries and just the things he said about Churchill. And he's like, yeah, great. Okay, that's insane. Also, please let me go to bed. It's 3 a.m. Like, to me, that was the perfect encapsulation, about all of these different things. So seeing it from this outside person who knew him and was with him through the junk of this stuff was a very eye-opening way for me, because obviously I knew Churchill had this background, like you talk about with, the South African War and all this stuff, and being a journalist and a painter and blah, blah, blah. But then this individual is like, yeah, he's good, bad, and kind of dumb, but smart, but also he's kind of crazy and drinks too much. And it was just a real eye-opening way of looking at this as a figure at the time, saying these things. And it's always going back to that argument of we project backwards. And I'm saying, no, it's a perfect example for Churchill, because that's what people say, right? We see him differently than they saw at the time. And I go, well, that's just not true. So
I think he's a good example. Integral. You can't, there's many people from World War II. You can take them out of the spider's web and it'll kind of close around them and make no difference. But him, everything kind of goes through him. Every relationship between every individual that was a key figure in World War II, Churchill is there as part of that relationship somehow. Stalin, Hitler, Roosevelt, Chamberlain, he's just there. He's omnipresent. He's the center, like a buzzing kind of hornet in the middle of everything that was and stuff. He's like a fly bumping around, bumping into things, some of which is genius and some of which is chaotic, but everything to do with the study of World War II and I guess World War I, and indeed British history generally in the 20s, 30s, and even into the 50s and 60s, Suez Canal, Churchill just looms to all of that. And he looms to everything we do now. He's how much of foreign people's impressions of Britain, Churchill has become tied up with the bulldog and John, Churchill is just, he's just Churchill.
It's hard. I mean, I agree. That's the best way to put it. It's just a complicated figure. And I think that's why it's so fascinating to study him, because especially now with the things that people claim and all this stuff, like I already said about projecting backwards. And I'm like, Yeah, you can make Churchill be the greatest villain on the face of the planet if you want. You can also make him look like, the greatest saint who ever lived, depending on what angle you take and what event you're looking at. You want to talk about the Dardanelles all day. He's this dumb monster, got a bunch of people killed. Look at the Battle of Britain. He saves Western civilization. So,
but this is the key thing is that he can be both those things at the same time. This is one of the things I've learned about history from doing my channel and speaking to people like yourself, is that two seemingly contradictory points can be true at the same time about a battle or a person or an individual. It doesn't have to fall into this binary thing where, when we say, is this guy a genius, or is he a competent military leader, or is he a fool? I say, well, you can be both. You can have a good day and a bad day. Is this tank a brilliant tank? Yes, sometimes. And sometimes it's a terrible tank. What are you trying to do with the tank? Who are you using it against, in what conditions, and there's always an answer that can say, I don't know. It's complicated. And that's what the freedom of the YouTube platform is, that we don't always have to draw a conclusion. If you wrote a 700-page biography of Churchill, and at the end of it, you hadn't really got the sense of the author's feeling about Churchill, I would feel that the reading of it would have been pointless. I at least want to know by the end of it, well, he clearly likes Churchill, or he clearly does, or he or she doesn't like Churchill. This is what they think. It's there's that book by the Canadian RAF guy, Patton's Gap, about the Falaise Gap, which is where it's clear from page 1 he absolutely hates Montgomery. And you get that right from the beginning, and it's just reinforced page in, page out, page in, page out. And by contrast, this guy loves Patton, and at least you know where you stand. And I think Churchill is too complicated to form a binary opinion about, really. You just go, I like this, and then there's that, then there's that cloud there, that.
Oh yeah, definitely agree. So just one question here, because I have to do a quick self promotion, because I don't know if everyone knows.
Of course. How did you start?
From yours? So kind of the same sort of thing in a different route. Obviously, I was doing the PhD when I started this. Why I wanted to do a channel was the RCR Museum in London, Ontario, where I'm from, asked me to do a talk on Hong Kong, I think, and they wanted me to record it. So I had to do editing skills for the first time in my life, and turns out I actually kind of enjoyed it. As much as there's parts of editing I hate, like you talked about, Woody. But so I said, hey, I can share some of my stuff. And I think I've told you this before, but it's thanks to you for having me on for that Hong Kong episode. If I hadn't done that, and then doing the one on Juno Beach with, the Meg doing the walking around, OTD wouldn't exist in this format. So that's a very long story short, but that's why. And I've always loved history since I was a kid, is the long story. So I'm happy to get to do it every day, basically. Yeah, and also from History Explorer, I'm glad if you want to read that, I think it's just funny. I'm glad to hear that the algorithm works sometimes.
Totally awesome fishing, well, that's.
I have no idea how that happened, but sure, that's fantastic. Sorry, was laughing about that in my head very quickly. I know you don't want to run, but I want to see if there's a few more we can.
Get in. They got longer,
if that's okay with you. Sorry, everyone's loving your talking about your stuff that you were doing. Sorry, everyone's talking about Churchill now.
You're asking about FDR now.
Yeah, FDR, top 3 figures of World War II. There's an easy question. I don't know how you pick that.
Bill, Slim, Bertram, Ramsey. Yeah, that's a good shout there from Willie Robertson. Yeah, I mean, FDR, I hadn't realized till comparative recently how divided the US is about him. I thought he was pretty beloved, and he is by a lot of people, but there's a lot of people who don't like him at all. I hadn't realized he was quite as divisive. But maybe I just hadn't been meeting the right people. I don't know, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's always interesting to read, depending on what part of the US you can go to, because if people find out I'm a historian, they ask, and depending on where I am, it's a complicated legacy again, and it hasn't most of the time has nothing to do with World War II. Absolutely nothing. It's got everything to do with the New Deal and the programs that were or weren't put in place, and if your politics are against heavy spending, and then it's just
fear of government control. I think is the bit. How much you should trust the government, or how much the government should ever get involved in things. I think seems to be underlying a lot of the resentment there, which is interesting.
100%. And then you throw a world war on top of it, and it just creates more confusion. I think we talked about this before, but maybe your answer has changed, or if there's a new one on the docket for you, is what World War II location have you visited and keep going back there time and time again? I mean, you literally live in the central part of all of this.
I mean, I live in Normandy and I go to the Falaise Gap, but Arnhem, I go to Arnhem, not as regularly as I'd like to. When I go back there, I find this kind of excitement coming in when I'm heading up the road, getting close there. That was because living on the east coast of England as I did, it was easy for me to get the ferry Harwich Hook of Holland over to and go to the Arnhem battlefield that it was to Normandy in some ways. So I did that more often as a younger person. So Arnhem still excites me. And then just new battlefields, just going to a new one, going to that first place. And if you've got some frame of reference for a movie or a book you've read years ago, like the Vercors that I went to in July was fantastic, because I'd seen that Wish Me Luck SOE series back in the 80s when I was a teenager, and standing on that place, that same kind of plateau was really, spine tingling. So I have feelings going to battlefields that some people do, maybe going to football stadiums or although I have that as well. So I think places are very stimulating. I definitely believe that you can be standing somewhere and feel something coming up through that location, so yeah, I love going to new battlefields.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I mean, sorry, just had it and then lost it. You guys go too fast for me.
Look, they're coming in thick and fast, aren't they?
Jeez, I know you come on and it goes crazy. I just had it and I lost it. Crap.
Scrolly.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, well, one thing I want to talk about, if that's okay, is your recent trip to different battlefields that were part of the Eastern Front that could be qualified to be their own, I guess. Doesn't really fit the Soviet Eastern Front.
Central Europe front, I don't know. Is that how it's
presented when you went? Is it presented as an overall thing? Like how?
It's not presented at all. I mean, I was going to a place where there really wasn't much in the way of memorialization. There really wasn't anything sort of set up in the way of, beyond little kind of independent museums and the cemeteries that happen to be there.
Right.
It's not a place that people. I was with Ross and his brother Jeff Cable, who lived there, so they were showing me around a battlefield that they know, but people else there weren't going for that same reason. So I found it incredibly fascinating, and I came away with more questions than I had answers to the nature of, we were talking before going live, of goodies and the baddies and liberate. What does liberation mean? Here in Normandy, Bayeux, liberation is de Gaulle walking down, giving a speech June the 14th in Bayeux. Boom, that's it. Liberation, war is over, Germans have gone, peace comes back. That part of Europe is way more complicated because, and it's not even that the Germans get replaced by the Russians, because you have Hungarian, Romanian, Czech, Slovak forces involved on various sides, switching sides.
Yeah.
Complicated.
So I guess that kind of leads to my question is, because you live in the mainland, so that might affect your opinion, but I'm sure I know the answer. But would you recommend, I don't know, maybe say for North Americans to go visit there? Was it too difficult? Is it something you would need a guide for, kind of thing?
I mean, the cities like Prague, and which we did at the end, and Budapest are pretty user friendly. But we were going to some little villages in Hungary and on the Hungarian Slovakian border that, no one there speaks any English. There's not much. You need your Google Earth, you need your this, but people were friendly, but they were curious. I think you'd probably need to know what you're doing. You'd probably need to have a guide or someone there local with you to do the kind of stuff we were doing. Certainly. Yeah, but Budapest was probably, but my Budapest is tourist friendly, but not for World War II. I didn't get the feeling that other people were going there for that. I mean, when we got to anywhere that had a World War II connection, we were there on our own. Right. Then when you got back into the kind of the old part of the city, there's loads of people there walking around taking photos of churches and cathedrals, things like that. So Prague is incredibly well visited, and sure that the chapel where the Czech paratroopers got killed is very touristy, in a good way, but lots of people go there. But when I say lots, not lots compared to the old town. I mean, tens of thousands of Brits and stuff on stag nights and honeymoons and stuff down the Old Town. There were a few dozen people hanging around the church area. So most people aren't going to Prague for the World War II stuff. But yeah, incredibly interesting. And I definitely feel I've got unfinished business back there.
Okay.
But Budapest, but Vienna, was quite interesting, but a bit touristy. But yeah, no, I found it very, very enlightening.
Yeah, I mean, because that's one I've always been interested in, but distance and time and money and everything like that. But I've heard those countries are just great to visit generally, so that's good to know.
Yeah. A beer under €2 a pint, you can't go wrong there.
Yeah, it's cheap for now until people find out. But here's a quick one, and then we'll see how many more are left after this, because I'm interested in this as well. So it's from Kevin Lambie. Is back in the day, what was the Turo ratio for, I guess, from the English-speaking countries?
All tour guides will tell you that 90 to 95% of their tour clientele are American, US.
So a lot of Omaha, Utah.
Yeah. 2 million people come to the American Cemetery on Omaha Beach every year, and about 5 million people come to Normandy, but they aren't people taking tours. So generally, rule of thumb, Belgians, Dutch, Germans, people from Europe who are visiting Normandy don't take tours. And the people who do take tours are English speaking. And the people who take the tours are the Americans, generally. I mean, there's a 5% Canadian market and British market, but yeah. When Brits were still coming to Normandy because they could during the post-COVID era, but North Americans weren't, the industry couldn't recover. I mean, the British, European people were not in any way replacing the proliferation of Americans that come over. So yeah, 90% Americans. So that doesn't mean that you don't have Americans who also want to see the British and Canadian sectors. You've got got to persuade them. But in terms of the populations, it's 90% Americans take tours in Normandy.
Yeah, I guess shouldn't be surprised. I thought I'd be a little more not balanced, but not as that much. But that makes perfect sense.
Again, I stress the fact lots of Brits come here, but they don't take tours, and not in the same way. Or they don't take tours with local guides. You've got the big British tour companies like Ledger who bring over probably thousands per year. They are bringing lots of Brits over, but they're not engaging guides in Normandy. So that's a different percentage. So when you add them to the total, it still wouldn't compare with the Americans. Every single day, if I was to stand up at the rail station from sort of 8 in the morning till 10 o'clock, there would be hundreds of Americans arriving on the train every day.
Right. That makes perfect sense. Question. I lost it. But about Pret Routar, are you going in, generally speaking, I guess, about the East, but Operation Bagration? I can never say it on live streams.
People say it differently. There's Bagration, there's Bagration, Bagraton. I mean, yeah.
Are you going to cover that on the
Absolutely.
channel?
Yeah, no, and hopefully with Pret. Yeah, no, I mean, it's whether or not I do it. I haven't yet decided whether I'm going to try and devote weeks to each operation or try and go more kind of like if there's a week in June where there's something happening in Normandy and something happening Eastern Front happening in Southern Pacific. I haven't really thought that far ahead yet. I'm still trying to do my kind of manic Monday, 3 shows on a Monday, but I definitely will be. You can't look at 1944 without looking at what's happening with the Soviets pushing west. So yeah, absolutely, I will be covering that. But there are way too many anniversaries this year to deal with, and then next year after August I'll have September, October, November, December where there's not much happening. War crimes trials, DP camps, that kind of. So I'll have to go back and fill in all the stuff I didn't do for anniversaries. Kind of, hey, let's pretend it's June 1944 again and do some stuff for next year. But yeah, no, I definitely will be covering the Eastern Europe because it's too important not to.
Well, especially with Pret on, he's just fantastic. So, I mean, have him talk on anything, and it would be great. I mean, it's just an area myself I want to learn more about. So I guess the anniversaries coming up are going to be a good way to do that because it's going to get attention, as it always does.
Well, I mean, it will get less attention because we're not. That was that we've talked about before. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you could legitimately write a book about World War II without mentioning the Red Army and the Soviets at all, because then there was that era where you had to mention And for every German killed on the Western Front, 7 were killed on the Eastern Front. But we're going to clearly be moving away from that again because of the modern situation with Russia being, as they are in Ukraine. There are Russian historians who now are not having dialogue with Western historians. And so I can see publishers will not be wanting to publish books for the next couple of years saying nice things about the Russians, understandably. So I mean, there was a big history conference in Moscow every year up until 3 or 4 years ago that I know various people went to this and did. I think there was one in Moscow and there's one in Stalingrad. Well, that's not be happening for the time foreseeable future. So yeah, we'll be seeing a different way of talking about the Eastern Front. The apology will be the other way. The apology will be, we have to acknowledge the assistance of the Red Army in World War II, but we do not condone lots of caveats.
Oh yeah, and there'll be caveats too from the other side, which I run afoul with when we had the Waffen SS veteran getting standing ovation in the House of Commons. People have been coming at me from both sides on that one. Okay, here's a question. I have no idea what Willie is talking about. I know these places, but I have no idea what's going on here.
There we go. Well, he was on the October tour, and no and no is a simple answer. That's Mag's department. Mag is the fluent French speaker. So no, we should go back and speak to people. So yeah, we an old guy came out at LaVigne Patry and said that he witnessed the Canadians coming in there. And he witnessed them walk back from the battlefield. He was 11 or 12 or something, which was quite moving. It's one of those things that unfortunately, we both have these ideas of following things up, and you make a mental note of it and you write it down, then you just don't do it. Life gets in the way.
Yeah, so good to know. But yeah, I have some similar stories like that in Normandy myself. People just kind of come out of the woodwork when you're standing.
And we will have to come back and talk about the fact that the 80th of Normandy is going to be both a positive and a negative, because it's going to Lynn's going to come here, and there's going to be lots of focus on the beaches, lots of focus on the same old stuff, and no focus on the land campaign. Lots of tropes will be repeated. The news articles that I can see already coming out. The D-Day worked because Hitler was asleep kind of stuff, and of course he kept the tanks in reserve elsewhere, and Rommel was the genius. So we'll have to batten down the hatches and prepare for the fact that journalists who don't normally talk about World War II will be talking about World War II around May and June to get their D-Day article out. So we'll have to ride that wave of bad history.
We'll do. I'll bring you back for that one, because we were going to talk about that today, but just too many other great questions. Because that's the one thing I want to talk about with you, with all your experience and me going there as well in April. I think maybe after that, I don't know. We'll see when we can figure it out. But this is a good question from Darren, because I mean, obviously, I've been talking to you about this, but not everybody. Is the change about the 20-minute presentations? And you've talked about this. It is to get more people.
Get more people.
And then it's a good question, because I don't know this from Darren. Is there any other, he says, is there anything to enhance your show? Is there anything else you're thinking of doing? Any pie in the sky?
I'm sure there probably are things I could do to enhance my show. Whether I've had the ideas and have the foresight to implement them, I don't know. What I have found with the 20-minute shows is actually sometimes the information conveyed is just as detailed as in the hour, and that is interesting, because as a tour guide, if you have an hour to tell a story, you take an hour to tell it. If you have half an hour, do it in half an hour. If you only have 10 minutes, you do it in 10 minutes. And actually, sometimes you think, actually, I did it just as well in 10 minutes as I did an hour. And I think giving the historians that rigid, no, it's going to be about 20 minutes, they're able to convey it just as well. Because you go in the houses, you and I are doing it during the show. You kind of go down rabbit holes, and you stop and you pause and you repeat yourself. And, we probably said the same thing about Churchill. We oversaid it, so the 20-minute format encourages an efficiency. But other than that, no, the long-term historians coming on for an hour and a quarter is the ultimate way I want to keep on going. And with the same kind of format of people coming on with a PowerPoint presentation, not much in the way of beyond that, because out of date can't go more out of date in terms of the way I do it. And the people out there like Rob watching, if you do all the fashy, gimmicky, animated stuff like that, the more you do like that, the more it will feel out of date 5 years down the road, because someone else will outdo it with something even more impressive and more sound effects and more music and more layers. So at the heart of what I do on my channel, and to some extent what you do, because you do a lot of stuff with the original footage, is that it's a simple formula that works. And and better tech doesn't necessarily bring better history.
Well, that was going to be my point. Is again not bashing, but also maybe we can end negative again. That's not surprising for the two of us.
We're allowed to.
It seems that that's the focus. You know what I mean? It's the focus on the animation and you know what style you're going to do it in, and then the research and the actual history part are secondary. It seems like
there's lots of the ones that use the video game footage because it's amazing, and you can because it's your own footage. If you have a game where you're playing with World War II warbirds and you set up the environment so that you have what it is the Great Mariana's Turkey Shoot or something, you can then as a historian talk over footage you've created on your own computer and upload it. So it looks incredibly flashy because it almost looks like real footage, but you've still got to do that historical research to make sure that what you're saying isn't, you know, repeating a myth or something. So yeah, and we're back to the idea that the average viewer doesn't necessarily have the skills to discern what is good history and what is bad history and what is mediocre history, and that sounds incredibly patronizing. But I can recognize bad World War II. But if I'm watching a how to repair my washing machine video, which I've done that kind of stuff, I have no idea whether the guy explaining it knows what he's doing or not. I have to trust that if he says he's a washing machine man, he knows what he's talking about. And so I'm no better skilled at discerning other people's skills, but I can sometimes recognize bad World War II stuff because that's where I spend my life.
Yeah, I mean it's perfect. And as YouTube always is, there I got criticized for doing a reaction video and saying some things weren't great. And it's like, well, glad that a PhD is talking about cartoons. And I'm like, you have no idea how any of this actually works, do you? Yeah. The impact these things have. It drives me bonkers. Yeah. Okay, so one more, if that's okay, because then I can lead into having you back.
That's a big one, though.
It's a big one. So maybe now, again, as we always say, we don't have to.
No, is normally becoming Disney-fied. Yes, parts of it absolutely are. In the 20 years I've been here, certain parts of Normandy, Aramonche, Santa Maria Église, maybe even a little bit around Pegasus Bridge, they're getting more and more monuments going in, more and more information panels, more and more, you know, just another week, another monument, another panel. And I don't know. I mean, but that doesn't necessarily mean Disney is a bad thing. That Jeff is using Disney as a negative adjective. People love theme parks. So when I say yes, it's becoming Disney-fied, that is admitting that it could be negative. It also could be positive because we have the big debate about the D-Day land that's not ever going to be called D-Day, that is going to be happening at Colombelle near Caen. You know, Ben Main put it on the link on his Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and it's going to be happening. There is going to be this theatrical experience where you as an audience are sitting on a 500-person stage that moves through an environment with actors, reenactors, and holograms and stuff, recreating a Battle of Normandy. Now, that the description of that I gave may horrify people, but it also may excite people. Until we've seen it, we won't know which way it's going. There's theme parks give people experiences, and if that's the way moving forward is to give people a more of a thematic approach to understanding history, right? Then that's good. So yeah, it is becoming more Disney-fied, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as people are coming. I mean, we've all seen those museums, Brad, that have got amazing stuff in it, but it's sitting in cabinets made in 1723, and there's some old volunteer there who's a relic of the First World War himself explaining stuff to you. And we like it because we can see beyond the lack of professionalism to the rarity of the items. But you'll see someone else walk in and is thinking, what the hell have I disinfected myself? Why is there no buttons to press? Why? And so imparting history needs to keep up with the methods that people learn.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. Sorry, not to cut you off there, but and Dave Patterson here makes the perfect point is Disney makes a ton of money, but when that sense is if these things make more money, they bring more people in, more people will learn. Yeah, people are just going to sit on this stage and never think about it again. But it could be that kid, right, who's 10, 12, goes on this thing and starts a lifelong passion. You don't know. You don't know.
When I had the Sophie line on talking about the restoration of tanks, you know, the kids, there are still kids who go to Bovington Tank week and see a running tiger that then write books on armored warfare 20 years later. There are kids who go to air shows and maybe they see the P-51 do a loop, but they maybe 20 years later they're writing about the P-39 aircraft, whatever it would be. So the route in doesn't matter. The route in, if it's comics, if it's a theme park experience, if it's a more flashy museum, it doesn't really matter, as long as one of those kids gets, or some of those kids get that little hook and decide it's the way forward to keep on spreading the news about history. And I think we don't. I had this discussion at lunch of the day. We don't all need to know about history. Not everybody in the world needs to understand what our past is. We don't all need to go through life knowing the date of the Battle of Midway, as long as some people do, and as long as there is an ability to go and find it out when you need to know. So that 10-year-old boy may only need to know, or that human being may only need to know the date of the Battle of Midway at one time for a pub quiz. But as long as they know where to go and find the information, if they know how to Google it, or if they want to go and look up their relative's service and they know where there's a museum in their local town, they can go there, then we're fine. Again, I'd rather people know nothing about history than know the wrong things about history.
Yeah, and I agree. And I've discussed this with you and other people as well online multiple times, sometimes it's better to know nothing, because if you get stuck in your way and it's wrong, or it's, confirming your own prejudices or whatever, to me, that is far more dangerous. And it has become dangerous. And I'm not using that as a hyperbole. Right? Mm-hmm. This stuff can be used for, as we're seeing today, violence. It's troubling. But yeah, I mean, I understand the Disney-fied and it's a pejorative. I get that. And Arromanches is obviously not my favorite place in Normandy, but I get the appeal. Even Pegasus Bridge felt like a little much to me, with everything going on there, especially when you see the old photos of the place, of what it looked like on the day. I prefer the old version, but again, I don't live there. I'm not French. It's not me to decide. But it's just, I think it's an interesting question. And yeah, I'd love to have you back on to talk about when we get maybe closer to these anniversaries.
Yeah, there's lots to talk about that. And, it's some people see crowds as meaning, well, it must be popular then. That makes them feel more open to learning, whereas if you're standing by an empty field, and well, how can this possibly, seeing other people engaging makes you feel like you laugh more at a comedy film at the theater if other people around you are laughing, then you watch it back on DVD a year later, well, it wasn't that funny, but when people are there laughing with you. So if you're there at someone, everyone else is reading the stuff, you go and read it yourself. So it's crowds can be a good thing, and people of different ages there, and if they're having a beer at a cafe beside a World War II site, then at least they're there. So I'm trying to be positive about it, because I can be too grumpy sometimes.
Well, I mean, we could just focus on all the negatives, but I guess we'll see. I guess it's the best thing we can do on here, right?
Let's
see.
Reschedule. Let's do another one.
Yeah, but I would definitely want to talk about that. But there's just tons, and maybe we'll do a little bit of structure and give people more heads up to get some questions in.
Heads up. Got to planning things. That's not my red. That's not my
write something down, maybe a couple of questions.
It's wise words, Brad.
We'll write maybe one or two things down instead of just flying by the seat of our pants. But other than that, thanks, Woody, for coming on. It's always great.
Thank you. On, it's always good
on the channel, and obviously just going on and about this stuff. We could do it for hours and hours and hours, but have to do other stuff in our lives, I suppose.
We'll do it. We'll have to do it with a beer in our hands. We'll do it actually live in a pub at some point. That'd be good.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, we could definitely figure something out. I'm staying in right on the beach because it was actually the cheapest, which is
cool.
Weird to me. But because people are like, stay in Bayou, and I'm like, it was expensive. But anyway, so we'll figure something out. But other than that, thanks everyone for hanging out.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. Great ones.
Yeah, great questions, and for showing Woody love that he very much deserves, because he's not going to say it himself. I will. For those of you who don't know World War II TV, say again, you should be subscribed. Everything's linked. Just go do it and watch forever, because there's so much great content out there. You can watch for days and days and days and not see something new every time. So
brilliant. Thanks, Brad. There and watch Brad's channel. Keep going with it. Fantastic stuff there as well. There we are.
Thanks a lot, Woody. All right, everybody. Have a good one. See everybody. Bye.